Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Chris Dost. Welcome to my channel, Biblical Languages and Literature. In this video, we're going to continue our discussion of the quote-unquote definite article in Aramaic. What we really mean is the emphatic or the determined form. That's the proper terminology. Before we get started, however, to those of you who have already become subscribers to my Aramaic and Hebrew comprehensive tier, thank you so much, as your monthly support enables me to continue producing these in-depth videos. If you haven't subscribed to it yet, please consider doing so. For $12 a month, a fraction of what it costs to go to Bible college, seminary, or graduate school, you gain access to all of my Aramaic and Hebrew videos and a number of Greek videos as well. And as part of this package, you not only get access to Biblical Hebrew 1 and 2 and Biblical Aramaic 1 and 2, but a host of expositional videos on the Hebrew Bible and the ancient translations thereof, particularly the Aramaic Targumim and the Greek Septuagint. Thank you so much for considering joining today. All right, so as I said earlier, our task for today is to deal with the, let's call it for now, the definite article in Aramaic. So in the previous video, we looked at Aramaic nouns and adjectives, and we discussed how we need to analyze all Aramaic nouns and adjectives for number, the three classifications of which are singular, dual, and plural. We also need to analyze them for gender, masculine and feminine, and we need to analyze them for state, absolute, determined or emphatic, and construct. So we've had a couple of videos already in which we've looked at masculine and feminine singular absolute nouns and adjectives. And so now we're continuing our discussion to the determined forms or the emphatic forms, or what we might loosely and somewhat incorrectly say, the forms that have the definite article attached to them. Now, we said that with masculine singular determined forms, we're going to expect to see kamatz as the final vowel, followed by the vowel marker aleph or he. We can see either one because they are both quiescent or silent when serving this function. So final kamatz and a final vowel marker aleph or he. That's for the masculine singular emphatic forms. And we see that with the word melech, king or a king. It could be either one. Melech is the absolute form, meaning king or a king. But in the determined form, we see that the final vowel is now a kamatz with the vowel marker aleph after it. Malka. And that means the king, most of the time. We said the determined form can also indicate a vocative, that is direct address. So if one were addressing the king and wanted to say, O king, Malka would be an appropriate form. Now you might say, why did the initial segol become a patach? And while it's not the purpose of this video to deal with these questions, it's actually the short a vowel represented by patach that is the original vowel in this word. Words go through morphology or morphological changes, we might say. And so the original a sound became an e, represented by segol, later on. But I don't want to get into too much detail on that right now. That's really a more advanced concept that we'll deal with in other videos. But for now, just understand that the determined or emphatic form of melech is malka, and we're focused more on the ending, not the internal changes. Okay, so we said with masculine, singular, emphatic, or determined nouns and adjectives, we expect to see a kamatz and then a final vowel marker, aleph or he. But with the feminine forms, so feminine, singular, determined forms, we expect the final kamatz vowel, the final vowel marker, aleph and he, just like the masculine, but then that is going to be preceded by a schwa and tav, a schwa and a tav. So tav can be a sign that we are dealing with a feminine singular noun. Notice that I said it can be a sign that we're dealing with a feminine singular noun or adjective. So let's see an example of how this works out with a feminine singular absolute form. So we have milah, which oftentimes means word. It can mean thing, matter, but we'll say word for now. So milah means word or a word. you see that it ends with a kamatz he. So the kamatz he can be a suffix indicating that a masculine form is in the determined state. But the kamatz he can also serve to indicate that we are dealing with a feminine singular absolute noun or adjective. And that's what we have in this case. Milah is a feminine singular absolute noun. So what happens when we put it into the determined form if we take milah and make it feminine singular determined? Well, we see the kamatz aleph suffix. It could conceivably be a kamatz he, but we have kamatz aleph here. But that original kamatz he suffix in the absolute form has now become shwa tav. So milah in the absolute form, word or a word, has become milta, which more often than not would be translated the word. Okay, so let's look at some of the masculine singular absolute forms that we've covered already in Daniel 2, and then see how they transform into masculine singular determined forms. So the first word we have is melech. Melech, you can see it in red there, and you'll recall from our previous videos that I've been using yellow arbitrarily to indicate masculine singular absolute nouns and adjectives. Masculine singular absolute nouns and adjectives. But the one we're choosing on this page among the 5 that you see is the word melech. And on its own, it would mean king or a king. In this case, kol melech would be every king or any king. Now, in Daniel 2:4, we get the determined form, and notice what happens. It becomes malkah. In fact, malkah is the first Aramaic word in the book of Daniel, malkah. And so we see that melech, which ends with its final root consonant, now has a kamatz aleph suffix, malkah. And in this case, it means O king. We see that the same form appears in verse 5, where we get ane malkah ve'amah, and that means the king answered and said. The king answered and said. So melech becomes malkah in the masculine singular determined state. We see that malkah also occurs in verse 11 as well. The phrase kodam malkah, before the king, kodam malkah. But notice that at the beginning of Daniel 2:11, we get the form malkah with a he suffix, kamatz he. And that means exactly the same thing as malkah with the aleph suffix, which you see below in the 3rd line here of Daniel 2:11. So the clause that begins this verse, umilta di malkah shael yakira, means the matter that the king asks is difficult. The matter that the king asks is difficult. All right, let's look at another masculine singular absolute noun from Daniel 2. And here we get Allah, Allah, which means God or a God. So we've seen that these forms basically follow the paradigm melech malkah. That's our model or our paradigm. Melech becomes malkah. So what did we say about feminine singular nouns and adjectives? Well, a word like milah, which has the kamatz he suffix in the feminine singular absolute form, becomes milta. Milta in the feminine singular determined form. So we see that final he in the feminine singular absolute suffix morphing to a tav. And so in Daniel 2:9, 3rd line down in red, you can see the word umilah. And milah means thing, word, affair sometimes. What does it look like in the feminine singular determined form? Well, that's the second to last word in the first line, the last word of verse 8, milta. But we've seen that already. Let's look at some other examples. How about the word chokhmah for wisdom, chokhmah? Okay, and just for ha-has, let's go to the Leningrad Codex and look at just a couple of these forms in the manuscript, just so we get some practice reading Aramaic from the Leningrad Codex itself. All right, so let's look at the first word in the top right. Try to pronounce that, and pause the recording if you need to.